Isolationism, I think, is kind of accepted that that's the reason World War II kicked off the way it kicked off, because the United States didn't want to get involved until it was too late.
I think that it would have gone just fine if the United States had not gotten involved. I don't think the U.S. intervention was necessary in World War II.
Really?
Really.
I mean, it was the Russians and the Germans versus France and Britain.
I think they were already winning.
The British, it was just the French were taken over in 2 weeks, and then the British.
No, not French. No, not the French. The British. I think the British were already winning the war when we got in. I think they were going to win. It was going to be ugly victory, pretty brutal, but they were already bringing it home.
I guess the U.S. had funded them throughout the war.
Supplied weapons.
So
I have a collection of old Life magazines that I bought in an antique store. It's really cool to read about, it was 3 months before D-Day. There were reports that the U.S. was staging weapons in the U.K. for defensive purposes. And only now do we look back on history and go, they were planning on invading.
The Lend-Lease program.
So there are photos of all of this crazy U.S. military ordnance and materials in the U.K. We had been, whether if it was the British soldiers that were winning, it was because we were basically giving them weapons.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Nazi Germany was collapsing on the inside too. They had totally burned through all of their artillery. Their economy was just absolutely just going up in smoke. It was a disaster over there. So they pushed really hard with German blitzkrieg strategy through everything that they had at the war, and then it just ran out. So that was it's not just like the United States came in and just yay, war over. There was so many things going on in that war.
In an isolationist state, if we were, would that just be, you mean national isolationism? A couple questions. Where would it stop? How local would the isolation become?
I think it would be the federal government just pulling out of as many things internationally as possible.
And then what if foreign countries start polluting the air or destroying the ecosystem, and then we're like, hey guys, stop, and they're like, nah.
Well, I mean, they already are.
But we have bases kind of with nukes pointed at them, and you're like, you're going to stay in the Paris Accord, you're going to do these things.
That's like
not
ESG.
Not that it's a winning strategy, but there's a deterrent to completely annihilating your environment for profit.
I don't know if that's a really a big concern that everyone has. I think right now developing countries are polluting so that they can catch up with the rest of the first world, and maybe that's okay. China is definitely heavy on pollution. I don't know that they care that much.
What about space colonization? If we were isolationist and not involved in China's colonization of Mars, or if we weren't doing it together,
take it to the moon.
You don't think that would result in war if we isolate?
That'll definitely result in war.
Explain it again.
If we're not doing it together,
let's not even go that far. Say Antarctica.
What about Antarctica?
Should the U.S. have territory in Antarctica?
Who cares?
The research scientists in Antarctica.
But why do we care about what they care about? It's Antarctica. It's a chunk of ice.
For now.
So, but by that logic, you're saying that none of what the United States does matters outside of the United States.
Not very much.
So, scientific research done outside of this country is irrelevant.
I don't think it's irrelevant, but I don't think it's worth going to war over.
So then, what's your view of a functioning country then? I mean, Antarctica, I think, is an interesting question for libertarians in this regard, because there's limited claims. It's like everybody has a sliver of it.
Yeah.
And there's extremely important research being done there, particularly drilling into the ice and then tracking the state of the planet over the past 10,000 years or whatever. And the fossil records and things like that is going to grant us a tremendous amount of information, which can probably be applied to evolutionary biology, which can potentially be applied to genetics or who knows what. So we should just say, we should ignore all potential new territories to foreign countries.
I would not go to war over Antarctica. That's how I would draw the line.
What if there's a new material discovered on the moon that will allow China to make a devastating new weapon? And we are there, and we have a base, and should we just abandon the base and be like, we don't want to get into a conflict with China because they're interested in the space?
Well, that's pretty far out there. I mean,
that's why I say Antarctica.
On the moon. Yeah.
What if China starts making advancements in Antarctica, pressing into the U.S. borders? Should we retreat because we don't want to go to war?
I think it really depends. It's a cost-benefit analysis, and sometimes you do have to cede ground. That's what I'm kind of arguing and advocating for in the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
I mean, the difference with Ukraine is that it's useless to us. It's a NATO.
Yeah.
NATO wants this territory to expand. They want to expand their influence. Russia doesn't want to give up control of a border, of a land bridge to one of its only warm water. I think it's only warm water port in the Black Sea. So they're saying no. NATO has no real interest in it other than there's pipelines running through it, and they want to get energy from, the Qatar-Turkey pipeline up into Europe to lower the cost of gas. But that's an economic thing based on gas. And the United States and NATO are unwilling to give that up to Russia, despite the fact that Russia had it in the first place. So in this instance, it's the U.S. pushing on Russia to take from them. It's an inversion to the analogy of Antarctica.
So it's interesting. What about diplomacy? Because that's something that's been really missing in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And I think that diplomacy is something that the United States should always employ, no matter what the conflict is.
The U.S. and the West tried diplomacy with Syria, and Syria said no.